Hey guys, Mr. Pokey here, back with another video. So today is a very long overdue video, which essentially we're going to be going through CN unit analysis on our very favorite, most OP T0 carry, Seele, right? So one reason why I never really got around to covering Seele, because the history of my content creation journey didn't really start with Seele's banner. It more or less started and I began creating a lot more content with Jin Yuan's banner, right? So I just never really got around to making a CN unit analysis for Seele. And another reason is because Seele is just a unit that has been extensively talked about by so many content creators at this point, where I just feel that it might be a little bit redundant for me to try and add on, because I think that at this point of the game, most players will already know how Seele works, right? But with that out of the way, I still want to get through a little bit of things on Seele that maybe I feel that it might help a player's experience improve if you know some of these things, right? So without further ado, let's get into today's content. So currently, Seele is our T0 carry even in the current patch 1.1, because her kit is just so overloaded that one can say a player's account without Seele is really very different from a player's account with Seele. More so than any other unit in the game. Like any other unit, like maybe Bronya is a really nice unit to have, Japard, Bailu, like all these kind of units are really nice to have, but none are as impactful as Seele. I can say, like, if your account has Seele, it's as if you're playing like Mario Odyssey. Compared to an account without Seele, you might as well just be playing Elden Ring. Just a really rough example to just show how impactful Seele is. So this just goes on without a question. I think everybody believes and understands that Seele's impactfulness in Honkai Star Rail is just really strong right now, right? Just to further add on to the point I've made earlier on, due to the growing popularity of my channel as well as the demands from my viewers, I've decided to dig into Seele's CN unit analysis so as to round up all limited banner units for all my viewers. So going forward into the future in this channel, I will be looking to cover every single limited banner whenever Honkai Star Rail releases a new one, as well as the 4-star units, right? Like such as Yukong, all this kind of good stuff. So yeah. Most content creators from CN and EN by now will have more or less grasped how good Seele is as well as how she works. So this unit analysis, this entire unit analysis, will go into like the more mechanical aspects where I feel it might not be fully understood or talked about. So we're gonna go in with a basic assumption that you understand how Seele works, how her resurgence works, and how to get extra turns, all this kind of stuff. So all this, I think it shouldn't really be explained over here, right? And lastly, with 1.1, there really isn't a massive difference in how you can build Seele, but with the introduction of Silver Wolf, a player's team composition would definitely be affected, because before the release of Silver Wolf, right, everybody was already hyping like, oh my god, mono content name is gonna be the thing, everybody's gonna be running Silver Wolf, Seele. But the biggest question is, when do you actually pair Silver Wolf with Seele? Because if you just take a look from a common sense perspective, if your Seele is already so strong that she's able to clear a stage, and of course this stage I'm referring to MOC, all my endgame content is gonna be referring to MOC. If you can already clear a stage with Seele, then is there really a need for you to pair Silver Wolf with Seele? Don't need to bring a flamethrower to kill a cockroach kind of thing, right? So, with that out of the way, let's get into the first part. Right, for relic recommendation, I think at this point, most players would have grasped that Seele would want to use attack percentage boots, but just for some of the players that doesn't really understand why we recommend putting on attack boots on Seele, right, this is gonna be a biggest factor to consider, right? So, Seele's Lightcone in the night is the only Lightcone in the game right now that can scale with speed, right? So a big factor influencing the decision of attack versus speed boots on Seele is the signature Lightcone, right? Which gives her increasing damage percentage on her basic attack and her skill, as well as crit damage on her ultimate up to 160 speed, right? So as such, players may have the intention of stacking on as much speed as possible for Seele to achieve 160 speed, which is the maximum benefit that you can gain out of the Lightcone, right? One thing to consider is that Seele also has an innate speed buff of 25% in skill, so this brings her base speed after the speed buff into 143.75. So, this is the very first thing you have to note. Seele's speed at the bare minimum is already 143.75, and you can just assume that this skill is always going to have a 100% uptime, because you will pretty much always use Seele's E in a battle, right? Because she's going to be your carry. So as such, players really only need 16.25 speed to achieve 160 speed, or roughly 8 speed subs on a gold relic. So this is just a little table to show you with the scale, with the main stat, what's the difference between the attack percentage boots and the speed percentage boots, right? So the gap between 160 is going to be like this for attack percentage, and the gap for a speed boots is going to be basically you're overshooting. You're already over 160 speed, right? So one thing to consider when it comes to building speed on a unit, Because a lot of other carries, maybe like Jingyuan for example, you want him to have some degree of speed because he doesn't have the resurgence mechanic that Seele have. Because Seele can essentially the only unit in the game that can go on for multiple turns, and during those turns, she doesn't even lose the buffs on her, right? So getting multiple turns on Seele is pretty easy, and that's why having so much speed on Seele is not as impactful compared to the carries that doesn't have this resurgence mechanic. Because of this resurgence mechanic, as well as her massive synergy with Bronya, because Bronya gives Seele extra turn, and if Seele gets an extra turn to kill another unit, then she gets another extra turn. This also translates into Seele gaining multiple turns from both sources, which is her resurgence and Bronya's skill, reduces the need for Seele to build speed and keep up with the enemy's turns based on the absolute cycles in MOC, right? So looking at the speed sheet over here, if you want enemies, for example, like 10 absolute cycles in MOC, and if you want your unit to go 15 times, right? So for example, 15 times, you will need 143 speed on Seele, which, I mean, she already has 143 speed because she's just that fast. But let's say you want to go 17 turns, so you need 162 speed on Seele, right? But because Seele has the resurgence factor, as well as most of the time you will probably be pairing Seele with Bronya, which increases the chance to proc her resurgence, then this extra turns can be achieved without stacking so much speed because she has an innate extra turn mechanic. So this is exactly what I'm trying to get. So if you're building speed on Seele with the intention of giving her extra turns to do more damage, then you can know that it is not that great as compared to just giving her more damage from attack percentage. Now, exactly how much extra damage you're getting from attack percentage, right? You can take a look at this over here. So huge shout out to this HSR damage calculator, which I have already placed in the front of my document. If you want, you can go ahead and matter around with this thing. I think it's one of the most comprehensive and accurate damage calculators that we have in terms of a Google Sheet, and anybody can use it. Just copy the sheet and paste it and you'll be able to use it, right? With that said, these are the parameters that I've set for Seele. The only thing I've changed is between the feat here, is changing between attack percentage as well as speed, right? Everything else has remained a constant. I decided to remove no sets of her, so there's no quantum set, no genius sets, no 2-piece, no Salsoto, and all the subsets is exactly the same, right? You have additional 20% crit rate, 50% crit damage, and 30% attack. Everything else is a constant. Link rope is attack percentage, planar sphere is gonna be quantum orb, crit rate body. Yeah, really basic stuff, really fundamental. The only thing I changed here is feat on the speed, and the only thing I really changed here is just the feat, changing between attack percentage as well as speed. So we just take a look at the graph over here. This is the graph for speed, and this is the graph for attack percentage, right? So this is the difference in damage. So what does this translate into? You can just take a look. The additional damage between speed and attack, right? So this attack is always going to win for sure because this is not a DPS simulation. This is just strictly based on how much additional damage your Seele is going to do, right? So obviously attack percentage is going to win on speed because speed doesn't affect the damage over here, right? Even factoring after the additional stacks you can gain from Lightcone, it is nowhere near as much benefit as you can get from a 43% attack bonus, right? The final extra damage from attack percentage is roughly 20%, 21% for all sources, right? For basic, auto, and ultimate, right? You can gain roughly additional 20% if you were to use attack percentage boost. So in conclusion, because our Seele is going to be doing roughly 20% extra on all her skills, auto and ultimate, and she doesn't require that much speed due to her resurgence talent, attack percentage boost on Seele is almost always better, except for a very rare occasion where a fight drags on for extremely long, Seele cannot kill any mobs in an extremely long fight, and that she doesn't have Bronya supporting her, right? So in this very rare situation, then there's a chance that speed boots might be able to help Seele more. So that is the TLDR. So next, we're going to be talking about set recommendations over here, right? So this is the graph done between the 4 sets possible for Seele. So it's going to be blue for Thief set, orange set is for Musketeer, green is going to be Genius against non-quantum weakness, and yellow is going to be Genius against quantum weakness. So this is her 4-piece. And as for 2-piece, it's going to be the difference between a Space Station and Salsoto, the blue one being Space Station and orange being Salsoto, right? And the main stats, I think it's pretty much straightforward at this point. Our body is going to be wanting crit percent in the early game, and then maybe eventually in the late game when we get better crit chance subs, we can pivot into a crit damage body, right? Our feet, as mentioned earlier, is going to be attack percentage, our rope is going to be attack percentage, and our orb is going to be quantum orb. Then for substats, it's also really straightforward. You just stack on as much crit value as possible, followed by some attack percentage and speed to help Seele achieve higher stacks on her Lightcone if you have a Lightcone, above all others, right? So at the end of the day, I just want to say that this is a very one-dimensional set recommendation. Genius is always going to be better on Seele, no questions asked, and Salsoto slightly edges out Space Sailing Station in the damage chart, right? But it's a really small difference, which is less than 2%. So honestly, whichever relic that you have a better subset on will be the one that you will use on Seele, right? Another thing to factor is farming Sao Soto is not as efficient as farming Space Station, because farming Space Station is in World 3, and World 3 also gives you the Fleetless 2-piece. And Fleetless is one of the best support / healer 2-piece that we have right now, and free-to-play / early game players such as yourself that doesn't want to go super into focus chasing that less than 2% difference, right, should focus on World 3 first, especially since it helps you fill out your support gear, your healer gear, as well as making a very minute difference on Seele's DPS, right. So with that out of the way, there is one reason why there is such a large 6% damage increase for Genius set when fighting against enemies that are weak to quantum, because as we know, Genius set that does additional defense ignores against enemies that are weak to quantum, right? So we'll be exploring why this is the case. The reason why Genius set has such a high increase in damage against enemies that are weak to quantum can be explained by the defense reduction / penetration mechanic, as you can see over here. As explained in my previous video on the Poke Academy, defense break stacking is additive, right? So the more defense break sources you have, the more benefits it will provide. So this graph essentially, and I've already translated this in my previous video, but this essentially means that the first 0 to 20% of damage, the first 0 to 20% defense reduction is gonna translate into a roughly 11.7% increase in damage, right? But as you go on more and more defense reduction, maybe by the time you reach 40 to 60%, this 20% is gonna give you a 15.27% increase in damage. And at this point, your total damage increase is going to be 45%, right? So this just goes to show, the more you stack on defense reduction, the more beneficial it's going to get. And because Genius set, against a quantum weakness enemy, has an additional 10% damage reduction, so the effect is going to be even greater, especially when you couple Seele with defense reduction sources like Pella, Sailwolf, then Seele can easily reach 100% defense reduction, and that is a huge increase in damage if you can achieve this, right? So for more information on how defense formula work, either check out my video on defense reduction, or you can check out the link here on Stario Fandom, which they essentially explain how the defense formula work in this game. So in summary, Seele's build is extremely straightforward and very easy to understand. As long as you stack on as much crit variance on her while filling the rest with speed and attack percentage, then Seele is pretty much good to go. Right now, we're going to be talking about the Lightcone recommendations on Seele, right? So you can see all these Lightcone recommendations, I've really taken the liberty of translating them. So the number one is going to be, of course, Seele's signature Lightcone in the night, followed by Sleep at the Dead, which is Yanqing's Lightcone, followed by S5, the Herta Shop, the Cruising to the Stellar Sea, and followed by Only Silent Rings, followed by the Return to Darkness, which is BP Lightcone, followed by Sword Play, and then Herta S1, Subscribe for More, and River Flows in Spring. One additional note I'm going to point out for Sword Play, but I'm going to be explaining this a little on. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But generally speaking, her signature Lightcone is going to be a clear winner against all others, although Herta's S5 Lightcone is definitely a decent substitute for free-to-plays and low spenders if you do not have Yanqing's Lightcone and you decided to not pull for Seele's Lightcone. But since we are going to be releasing this video after Seele's banner has already ended, it doesn't really much point. Just go ahead and grab Herta's S5 Lightcone if you already have a Seele and you didn't pull for her signature Lightcone, right? It's one thing to note on why Swordplay is so low here, and I know Swordplay is so low here, especially in contrast with the ranking in Pride Wind, right? Because Pride Wind, they definitely already listed Swordplay as a very good mechanic. One thing to keep in mind, this video was released really early. This was just when Seele's banner released, so maybe people's understanding for Swordplay might not be that strong, but the author has already set up his parameters for why Swordplay reaches this such a low level over here, right? So the damage increase for Swordplay is per attack and not combined. So this means that a skill that hits twice, such as Seele's A, is the damage increase from Swordplay is going to be 0% on the first strike, 16% on the second strike, and 32% on the third strike increase. So this averages to a roughly 16% increase in damage for her very first E, right? So this chart over here that the CN creator has made assumes that Seele will hit a target with an E 3 times before switching target. Once you switch a target, she have to restart her stack again. So every single time Seele hit a target 3 times, it's gonna be at 86.5%, which is really low compared to all the other Lightcones above, right? Below is a chart the author has also done where Seele only hits one target, i.e. boss, right? Like if you're not gonna be hitting any other mobs with Resurgence, you're just only gonna be focusing on boss during this entire time, 100% uptime on max 5 stacks on Swordplay, then this is gonna be the increase in damage, right? So in this scenario, Swordplay instantly becomes the second best Lightcone for Seele at 114.05%, right? So this orange bar is Seele. The rest of the bars represents other characters. This is Dunheng, this is Shusheng, and this is Yanqing, right? But Seele is gonna be at 114.05, which slightly wins out S1 Sleep at the Dead at 111.1%. So if you are able to hit a target constantly with Seele and don't change target, then Swordplay will instantly become the second best Lightcone for Seele. But keep in mind, this is at S5. This is an S5 Swordplay. So at S1, then the expected performance is definitely going to be lower than Herta Shop Lightcone, right? So that is just something to keep in mind. Now we've come to the final section of today's video. Like I mentioned, this video is not really that long compared to my other Seele unit analysis just because of how extensive Seele has been covered, and I really don't think people really need much explanation on how Seele works, right? But one thing to keep in mind that I think is pretty interesting is the synergy between Silverwolf and Seele. Like I mentioned just now, Silverwolf being able to give Seele additional defense breaks, all that kind of stuff, and Seele always equips Genius Set, means that Seele can easily reach 60+% defense penetration, so it's gonna be a huge increase in damage, right? When do you actually pair Silverwolf with Seele, right? There are actually 4 different scenarios to consider, and keep in mind this is not accounting for like an E6 S5 Seele who can 0-turn clear almost any boss even without the help of Silverwolf, right? So in that scenario, you just always run Seele herself, and you can just pair Silverwolf with the rest of the team, right? As well as the players having the right elements against the bosses when pairing Silverwolf with Seele. So in a scenario where if you paired Silverwolf with Seele, but your second carry is not the right element on the second boss, right? Since you already paired Silverwolf, then you have to pair Silverwolf with your second carry, just to increase your overall elemental coverage, because having the right element against the boss is really important in this game. So if your second element is able to have the right element against the boss, then this will be the factors to consider, right? So, scenario 1. The weakest boss is weak to Quantum, and the stronger boss is not weak to Quantum. In this situation, if your Seele is able to defeat the weaker boss herself, without the extra utilities provided by Silverwolf, such as the defense break, the attack reduction, the weakness implant, all that kind of stuff, you should let Seele take the boss herself, while giving Silverwolf to your second team, right? So, even if you have the right element for the second boss over here, right? For example, if you have Dunheng raised, Silverwolf is still an extremely good debuffer support, and no other carry can be as strong as Seele in the game right now. So giving like our second team Silverwolf's additional utilities is always going to be more beneficial than overkilling and giving it to Seele instead, which can already clear the boss by itself. So this is our first scenario. Weaker boss is weak to Quantum, stronger boss is not. Now for our second scenario, our stronger boss is weak to Quantum, but our weaker boss is not. Now if our Seele cannot defeat the stronger boss, even though she's weak to Quantum, like for example this Cocola over here, right? If our Seele can't defeat her alone, then we might have to consider adding Silverwolf as one of her supports to help Seele even more with the defense break, debuffs, and weakness breaking. And since the on top is going to be a weaker boss, we're hopefully going to hope that your second team is going to be strong enough to take on the weaker boss, whereas the stronger boss can leave it to Seele plus Silverwolf, which should allow you to clear due to their fantastic synergy together. Now for our third scenario, which is where both bosses are not with the Quantum. In this scenario, assuming that you have the right element for the first boss already, like for example you already have Dunheng built, so you're always going to throw him in team 1, right? For the harder boss, you want to pair Seele with Silverwolf to use it against a stage where you can implant Quantum winners with 100%. Ideally, the stronger boss is possible, right? So if you're able to implant a 100% accuracy on your Quantum on this second boss, then you can pair Silverwolf with Seele together, right? So that is pretty straightforward. Last scenario, which hasn't happened to us yet, we don't have a scenario currently, but in the future if this scenario were to happen, right? If both bosses are with Quantum, then we'll use Seele on the stronger boss and using Silverwolf on the weaker boss to act as the weakness implanter for our second carry. Because keep in mind, this is our Quantum, so it already has a Quantum weakness. Therefore, Silverwolf will not mark Quantum weakness. And if your second team is off element, right? Like for example, if you don't have Dunheng raised, maybe your second carry is like a Yanqing, then Silverwolf can easily help Yanqing stack on his ice weakness, assuming that you made the right team for him, which basically reduces the odds of Silverwolf aiming the wrong weakness implant at the target. So yeah, I've come to the end of today's CN unit analysis for Seele. Like I said, this is definitely a much shorter version compared to all my previous unit analysis, just because of how well Seele has been covered. But I hope at least maybe some of you guys have learned something from this very relatively short CN unit analysis. And yeah, that's all I have for today, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.